All the roads are winding. Welcome to the show, Asha. I'm so excited to get into whatever we're going to get into. I feel like there's a lot of magic wanting to come through. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Totally. And before we begin our conversation, would you like to set the energy of the space, do an invocation perhaps?
Sure, I'd love to do that. So I love to, of course, acknowledge the land that I'm on when I do my invocation, because that's really important to me. So I acknowledge the land that I am currently rooted upon. I am on the lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron Wendat people, those past and present who still take up space here. And I acknowledge all of those spirit that are witnessing this conversation today. And I'm just going to call on Eagle Medicine as we're in Eagle season right now in the medicine wheel. Mikisi, I welcome you in for this space, for this time, to sprinkle your medicine down upon us today. May we feel our connection to our hearts, to our spirits, to our higher selves. May we connect to that brilliant calling that you have, asking us to rise up in our own leadership, in our own way. We welcome you in today. We welcome in your presence. We welcome in your love and your guidance. Miigwech, miigwech.
Thank you. Beautiful. Well, you answered a couple of my next questions already. So I'll ask you, who are your ancestors? Where have you come from?
So my ancestors are Anishinaabe, and my maternal side is from Neashingagaming, which is Cape Croker First Nation. And my father's side is from Serpent River First Nation. So all First Nations across Ontario, my grandparents are also from First Nations, and their ancestors all sprinkled around Ontario and Canada and Turtle Island.
Wow. Thank you. And then I usually ask people who are the original people, the land they're on, and you've named that. So, is there anything else you want to say about that, about the original people, the land you're on?
I think the most important thing is that we're still here. I think we can talk about it as though, they were here in the past, and we have this sort of framework of envisioning that they're not still here, but we're still here. And the one thing I like to, because Indigenous people, I know mostly about Canada because that's where I'm at, is that invisibility piece, right? There's this invisibility energy around Indigenous people. And part of that is just seeing them from the past and not seeing that we're taking up space in our own ways too, as sovereign beings here on this land. So I really want to bring that present here. We're still here, we're taking up space, and we are, spreading our medicine in our own way.
Thank you. Love that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I love, that just reminder too. And it is easy I'm in the States, and so it is super easy to be like, yeah, that's all in the past. But there's so many places where the original people are still living, still taking up space. And do you have any recommended resources for people who are like, wait, what? There's always Google, of course, right? But any particularly awesome resources for how that you're like, oh wow, if you want to learn more about the people on the land you're on, go here, or just Google? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's so many books, right, that we can look at. The book that I love really is Braiding Sweetgrass. Is a beautiful book, and I'm sure many people have sort of read that. That's a beautiful book, and it feels very connected to what we're speaking about today. But I really think starting with acknowledging, looking at, there's apps, nativeland.ca, which you can find out the lands that you're on, and acknowledging that every day. And as a practice, as part of, if you're doing ritual, you're doing ceremony, you're praying, or you're doing those types of things, just acknowledging that. It takes 2 seconds, right, to acknowledge that and really see that the spirits of that land still exist too here, right? And the land's witnessed so much of that too. So the spirit of the land holds all of those memories and holds all of that in it as well. So when you're walking, every step that you're taking, acknowledging that the spirit of the land has witnessed and is holding still, I think is a really important thing. And then finding out about what's going on in your country with the Indigenous people, because there's so much that's not seen, not acknowledged, The missing and murdered Indigenous women, that's a huge issue that we're not seeing, and that's invisible voices that we're carrying and we're trying to uplift. The lack of clean water on our First Nations. My grandmother goes through water bans, and not having clean water, even though she lives 20 minutes away from a city that has clean water. So there's issues that are very practical, that are in our reality, that are happening, that I think it's important to know about. And there's definitely, yes, Google is a great resource for that. And yeah, just like really digging in and doing your own research, I think is really important.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And, I really loved your recent article about talking to the white women who wish they could be you. I think that was so beautifully shared about how people see you as this, you're Indigenous medicine woman, and you are embodying those ancestral gifts, the traditions, the medicine, the magic. And it to the outside world, it does look so beautiful, but people don't see that hidden side of, all the invisibility, all those practical everyday things, like not having water. That's, and just little, there's so much. I mean, you went over so much in your article as well of just like, okay, if you want to be me, do you also want to be asked how much alcohol have you had when you go in for medical treatment for something? And like, just so many little things that people don't think about. And I just want to say thanks for writing that and sharing that. And I hope people will go read it, because I think there is a lot of glamorization and, of these exotic, traditions, but there's so much more. It's beautiful. I think glamorization, to me, has an inherently negative connotation of like, I don't know, we don't need to get into that, but so it's beautiful, but there's so much that's unseen in that. And I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Well, I think it separates, when you use that word, what I saw was it separates the person. It separates like the people, right? It's like this characterization, I think, of like what Indigenous people are, what they should be, even the expectations you put on them. And we're not a monolith, right? We have like basically every First Nation is technically like their own country, right? With their own rituals and ways of being, food, tradition, all of those things from where I live to like the West Coast traditions are so different. You'll find very different ways of being in different First Nations and different reserves. So I think that we forget that too. We kind of lump all Indigenous people together and say, this is what an Indigenous person should be like. This is what they look like, which is really harmful. And then with regards to, taking sort of like the dream catchers, the earrings, all of those things, there's a way to appreciate those and not to take them from a people who you're co-opting all those practices, but then you're leaving the people behind. You're almost dropping the people down and you're saying, I don't see you that you don't have water to drink. I don't see you that a lot of your women go missing or they're murdered and, nobody cares about them. You're kind of dropping the rest, right? So really just being mindful of that. I just invite folks to hold the whole picture. If you are going to use sage, how are you going to use sage? And then how are you going to use that in your knowing of the people that you're kind of taking that teaching from? And what are you going to do about that? I think there's so many ways we can uplift and support Indigenous people. But we kind of can forget about that, right? And we just do the taking and we forget about the rest. So that's a really important part of what my communities do. I have a lot of allies and accomplices that come along the ride with me. They learn, they listen, they open their hearts. In a lot of the spaces I hold, we talk about decolonization and white supremacy and how we're unpacking this and how we're looking at our biases. It's not the most popular. It's not the most it's not the most sexy or whatever you want to say or glamorous, I guess, but it's the work that we're here to do. So I think that doing the work is so vital right now on this planet.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like a lifelong thing, doing the work. Yeah. It's not like, oh, I'm done. I did it. I'm all done. Yeah. And I think there's a lot. I mean, I'm certainly open to getting more into this, but I do want to recognize like there's so much out there because of the invisibility. There's so much out there talking about Indigenous trauma and epigenetic trauma and so this is very real and it's very impactful, and I definitely am willing to get into more trauma, but I also wanted to ask about Indigenous joy. And, I'm loving seeing, like, on Instagram and stuff, like, people bringing back, Indigenous people bringing back their dances and sharing that with the world, and just little things, and like their food practices, ancient food practices, and different things that are not just, I think that, a lot of non-white cultures and peoples can get portrayed as just trauma, trauma, trauma. And, there is joy, there is beauty. And I think uplifting that, like, is important. And I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful conversation. Something that one of my teachers that I've learned from, Lisa Renee Hall, she was speaking about algorithms. And I think this is really important about how when a person of color speaks about trauma, they get so much, so many likes, so many shares, so many, and I noticed that too, right? If I speak about that intergenerational piece or what I'm working through, it gets so much more traction. When we speak about joy, it's like, because that's not what we're expecting from Indigenous people, right? That we have that expectation that it's all about trauma. So I think we need to be mindful of that too. I mean, me as a person sharing on Instagram, I need to be mindful of that. I want to share what I'm connected to sharing, but I do notice, like, that gets fed, and then that collective energy gets fed, right, for all of us. So Indigenous joy is so important. And I mean, I try to put that in for me as a healer. I think that it's just like healing and making space and making capacity, because I've held a lot of capacity for trauma. I hold it in my bones, in my blood, in my water. It's there, right? So it's been, and that's what people don't understand when they take a practice. For me to even step up and say, I'm going to smudge today. Like, I've had to move through like layers of my grandparents being residential school where that was taken away, right? So there's all of that memory that I have to move through versus somebody who doesn't have that, who can just say, I'm going to take this and share that. There's no layers that they have to move through. So I wanted to bring that forward because I think that's a really important part of healing that generational trauma. And then to bring it to joy, I think you're right. The dancing is beautiful. But also looking at who we are today too, like who we are today and how we're showing up today. Because I think sometimes we can have that impression again of like, oh, those old ways are somehow more valued. They are valuable. We are returning to those. Those are beautiful things. And to just say, like, who are you as an Indigenous person today? Who are you in your reclamation? Who are you in your joy? Who are you in your sort of, as you give yourself that allowance to show up in your fullness and as you are? Because I think that that's like a really big piece of our joy, is just reclamation of that identity and saying, I'm allowed to be here. Like, after so many voices told us, we're taking that away. We're taking the land under your feet away. Like, when that happens to you, how do you find joy? How do you come into yourself and say, I'm worthy of existing here, right? So joy is a big practice and a beautiful medicine. And I think it takes a lot to get there. Sometimes, maybe for some folks it doesn't, but I think that it's something that I have to practice every day.
Yeah, I love what you said too about who are you as an Indigenous person now in the modern times, and even just that joy doesn't have to come from an ancestral practice. It can be, like looking at a flower, like bringing that capacity for joy. And I love that, and all the different layers. You spoke of the layers that you had to kind of move through, even just to smudge. And I'm curious now, I guess I want to get more into your personal story. Thanks for sharing sort of a more general, broad spectrum. And it sounds like you have, from a very young age, just been connected to the other worlds. You've been able to connect through the veil, and your ancestors have come to you, and that's just been alive for you. And I'm curious to hear, you mentioned your grandmother was in a residential school. What was different for you, and how were these? I would just like to hear about how this innate connection was nurtured and or oppressed for you, and how you've allowed it to thrive today.
It's been such a journey. I think that that's part of it, is that we are so colonized. We are so colonized. And in my direct lineage, there's an intense amount of colonization, where my grandparents were just like, the church was everything, because that's what, the missionaries came in and that's what happened. So it's like, if that's what is safe and you are trying to assimilate, because assimilation is safe, as a child too, like, you will only be loved and cared for if you assimilate. You will only survive if you assimilate, right? It comes down to that very like raw nature of like, you won't survive unless you do this. So that's like in the thread of all of my ancestry. So coming home to myself has just been such a practice. When I was a child, I would dream and see. So I was a seer. I was born, my grandfather said, "You got a seer there," to my mother. So they both saw these eyes that I guess were just very intense at the time. Everybody would say like, "Why didn't she smile?" And I don't know. I like to smile now. So I don't know what I was like as a baby, but I think that seer essence just came in with me. And then at night, I would see guides or ancestors show up at night. And I'd be scared. Like, I would be like, "What? Who is that? Who's coming?" And I didn't have any framework for that. My mother's my, I'd say, most treasured elder, and she would try to guide me in the way that she knew how. But again, she was colonized, right? She grew up very like strong Catholic and all of those things. She knew spirit existed. She trusted in spirit. She knew how to teach me in those ways. But again, it was through that sort of colonial lens, right? So she tried to help. She would ask me, what I dreamt about last night, and we would talk about those things. So she was very open, I'd say. So she nourished my sensitivity. She nurtured my empathy. All of those things, I think she really tried to hold sacred, which was very special for me as growing up. But I didn't really, like, I grew up in like a north of Toronto. I went to like a Catholic school and like wore my uniform and all of the things, right? And then I got sick. I got sick when I was 17, and I was diagnosed with lupus, and I was terrified. The doctors were like, "You're never going to have babies. We don't know how long you might live," because at the time they didn't really know what lupus was. So I went on this journey. I tried to take medication. They gave me steroids and they made me really sick. And that was my awakening. I was like, this isn't working for me. I need to find something else. So I was 17. And I saw a naturopath at the time. And that sort of unlocked this remembering. Like, I remember seeing her, and she was actually a really beautiful homeopath too. So she was working with energy. So she's like, "I'm going to prescribe you this remedy that is for your shyness and sensitivity as a child." And I thought, there's a remedy for that? Like, what are you talking about? And that just like unfolded and unlocked this, like, there's something beyond this physical body. There's something that's like a pulse, a vitality or a spirit or something. It just sort of unlocked that energy for me. And then I just went on this healing journey. It just kind of rolled out from there, where I was like, I want to heal myself. Like, and the way to heal myself is to return to the earth and to return to how my ancestors have been calling to me since I was a young child. They've been trying to awaken this and remind me, even though my life looked like didn't have that sort of eldership in that way, where we're like, we're going to teach you these ways. I had to truly dig deep and find it through my dreams and my visions, and through my practices, through my own healing work. Like, I can't even tell you how many healers I've seen over the years and journeys I've done to reclaim these pieces and parts. So it really is a personal journey of like reclamation, and almost like I've gathered these soul pieces back. And in that, there's been so much remembering, and my dreams are vivid. My visions are vivid. I hear, like, all of that spirit connection comes through so powerfully for me that I just can't not trust it anymore. It's guided my entire life, and my path has unfolded beautifully because I've trusted that, I think.
That's amazing. And I love how you mentioned, like, you didn't have physical elders there to teach you. So you had to learn from your dreams and just these different ways, that your gifts. And I think, I see people today who, I don't know, I want to talk about this, of like learning through your own experience and your own ancestors and guides and dreams versus needing a guru versus having a mentor? Because I think these are all different things. And like having a mentor and teachers is very helpful. But, you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh goodness, I can speak so much of this because that's what I've offered as a mentorship, because I truly believe, like my book is called You Are the Medicine, right? Because it's like, just because that's been my experience, like the medicine that has unfolded and unlocked from my own soul has been so potent that I just know that's available to all of us. And I think there is importance. I've had many mentors and guides and elders over the years that have helped me, right? But in every time, the most powerful time has been when they've held space and let me uncover it myself. And even I had a private practice for about 12 to 13 years, and somebody would lie on my healing table and I'd be facilitating healing. I could tell them what I saw. That was fine. But what I noticed, what was more powerful, is when they saw something and all of a sudden this unlocking happened. Like, oh, now I understand. I can pull that in and I can remember that, and it's going to be a rooted part of me now. So I've learned through working with thousands of folks now, like the most powerful reclamation and connection is when you have it within you and it just is birthed from you. Then all of a sudden it's just like that gets rewired somehow, like it's really from you. And I think that's amazing. So my lens is like, I can be your guide, I can be facilitator, I can hold the space, but ultimately your medicine's waiting to blossom, your knowing's waiting to blossom. There's other traditions that have gurus, and I'm just speaking for myself. I think those are beautiful ways too. It just hasn't been my path, so I can't speak to it in that way. And the folks that I call into my ceremonies and different offerings, that just seems to be what they need too. So I think it's just like different ways to like the same sort of wisdom. But to me, I think this is like, I can feel it in my body. It's embodied wisdom now. And that's just how I meant to share in the world.
I love that. And I think I'm going to say I love that after everything you say. I love that. But, it makes me think about how in our colonized patriarchal society, we're so taught to trust and believe in external authority over our internal authority. And we project that even into our gifts and our path and our medicine and our intuition. And what you just described is like, no, such a, like the medicine is in you, like you say, and we don't need to be grasping outside for that authority to tell us what is our intuition's already telling us, what's already happening inside. And I love how you mentioned that. It's like what you described makes me think of, it really is that remembering and reconnecting, helping people reconnect with their own inner agency. We've lost so much agency through this colonization process, and that's huge.
It really is. And I think you're right. And I see this sort of in the online business world too, right? Like I'm really here I've gotten really clear this year. I'm here for spaces and places where there isn't that sort of leader, where that's not that top down, isn't happening anymore. And where we're like breaking free of those old paradigms and old systems that are saying you have to actually have this system in order to be successful. Like asking us, what does success actually mean to you? Asking ourselves, is this sustainable? That's like a big thing too. Is it sustainable for my own system? Asking ourselves, how does my own nature play into this? Because instead of having that cookie cutter, like you can be like me, I just think that we're also unique. We're also diverse. We're like an aspect of creation, each and every one of us. If we all rose in our own knowing and our own sense of who we are to be here, I think the world would just be a better place, because we'd be rooted in that. There just wouldn't be that like comparison or that, I need to sort of fit into that cookie cutter thing. We'd all be like, no, I'm claiming this. This is what I'm here to do. This is what I'm up to in this lifetime. This is how I'm going to shine. So I see that kind of unraveling, almost like those systems and structures that have been based in the patriarchal way. I truly think, even as women, if you identify as a woman, we think we're doing it. Oh, we'll do it with seasons and cycles. I still think we're basing it from the patriarchy and the colonized way. We're just trying to fit ourselves into those boxes versus like breaking it all down and starting something new or remembered. I like to say remembered, because this is like a remembered way, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, I really, really feel that. And I'm so glad. I feel like here and there, I find people who are tapping into this flow, because this is how we are at Earth Speak, is like so many people come to us and they want like a system or a teacher. And I'm like, I'm not going to give you that. Like, I'm literally here to hold space. And it's sometimes, I don't know if you ever feel this, but it can be mind-boggling as like that space holder and business leader, business owner, because everybody just wants the to be told the thing, or to be given the thing, the process that's going to get them into the cookie cutter result. And I'm like, no, like, I don't know. I've been really, as a business, we've managed to communicate, and some people just get it, and other people are like, just don't. I don't know. I'd love to hear your experience with this, and if you've had frustrations as well or whatever, because it is a shifting paradigm. And like, people don't even see how colonized you are, that you need the teacher and the process of the system. But then even I see it in myself, and I'm like, I just want to be told sometimes because I'm freaking tired. So rant over. Thank you. Please share your, yeah.
I hear that, and I'm with you, because I'm decolonizing myself in huge ways right now. It's like a daily process. It'll be a lifetime process. I mean, what I can see, so I have like a membership that I created that was really rooted in community and experiential, like it really healing, like, because that's what I think we need right now, right? And sometimes I can see myself comparing myself to the memberships that have like 50 downloadable PDFs, or where it just seems like so much. And I'm thinking like, if this year showed us anything, it's like, how much capacity do you actually have to take in 100 meditations and journeys, 50 PDFs? Like, those things are all beautiful offerings, but if we actually just sit and say, do I have the capacity to take that in and to engage with that? Like, what do I really need? I sense that we need integration right now. We need experience. We need the embodiment. And I mean, that's just what I'm seeing in my own communities. We need that pause to just be like, to ask ourselves, how much capacity do I need? Because otherwise it's this constant like boom, boom, boom. And we're not taking it in to work it through our own system. And there's nothing wrong with those other ways. They're amazing. And that's the way that things have been done for a long time. I think that's what's most popular right now. So I struggle sometimes with feeling like I need to do that to be successful, or I need to, I still struggle with that. I need to go out, I would be more successful if I did it that way. If I said, oh, here's your 50 PDFs downloadable, right? But I know for myself and from what I see in my communities that it's too much. It's too much for them to even manage and take in, and then it adds a bit to their overwhelm of what they have to get done every day. So that's a very practical experience that I think I wrestle with, and I've noticed this year for myself.
Yeah, I hear that. I feel that. And then on the flip side, then there's the people who get it and they're like, I just needed connection, and it's so different. So yeah. I hear a lot of what you're saying. It really resonates with what we stand for and how we operate too. Because it's been kind of, it's been really wild. Over, I guess we talked a little bit before this. I was like, what do you want to talk about? And you were interested in talking about leadership. And I think this leads into it of like, there is this huge shift happening. And we're not saying one way is better or worse. You're not a bad person if you want the whatever way. It doesn't matter. But there is this way, and I think people feel it and they want it. And I'd love to hear about your thoughts on leadership through this shift as well.
Well, I guess some of the things I've been noticing, especially as an Indigenous woman and a person of color, because, I mean, there's lots of things that come up in that way, around how seen I am as an Indigenous woman. I've often wondered if I took the word Indigenous off of my profile, if I'd be more successful. Like, there's actually real life things, because I've been in business for almost 2 decades, and I do the comparison-itis thing. And I think I see white women rising really quickly, which is, I'm so happy for them. It's not that I'm like, I don't want them to rise. I just start to see it. A couple of years ago, I took a diversity training, and I think I've been sort of operating in my life up to that point. Like, I'm equal to white women. I'm going to just like push and just get to the same success. And there was something in that diversity training that just woke me up to be like, oh my gosh, that's not the truth. That's actually not the truth. And I started unraveling it. So I had this big grief, like, Oh my goodness, it's true. It's true. Like, and then, I mean, that was before a lot of these sort of anti-racism, like energies kind of started rising up in the collective. But I started grieving, thinking, it's true. I looked around at my colleagues who were white, and I saw how fast they were rising, and I was doing the same amount of work. I was showing up the same way, and I was thinking, this is really true. So, leading as a woman of color and as Indigenous woman, especially, I find it's been a bit of a challenge in that way to just keep coming back to myself and saying, like, you are enough as you are. There's going to be oppressive forces. There's colonized forces still at hand in our collective energies that are still there's racism that's still working through things, right? And even if people don't think like, oh, when I see the word Indigenous, there's biases that we still hold. Like, I mean, there's so many things that I experienced in my life of those biases and people, the racist things people would say. I know that many Canadians hold that in their hearts in some way in their consciousness. They don't want to admit it, or they have buried it really deeply down. So it does impact me as a leader in that way. And I'm ready to kind of step forward in a greater way to change that dynamic. That's what I'm here for too. Just sometimes it does feel like that equity piece, it's a bit challenging. Like sometimes I think it is to give women of color that extra lift up to make things equitable is really, really important. So what I see in leadership right now with a lot of white women being called in to do this work, and I just feel like things are kind of breaking apart. Like those old ways, they won't be sustainable anymore because we're not inviting everybody to the table, and we're not seeing that racism runs through even our business and our mindset and our biases and how we're doing Instagram, how we're doing all the social media things, right? And who's getting the platforms and all of those things. I think there's big change that still needs to happen, even though it's starting. And it's my intention to walk in leadership in humility and in grace. And sometimes I think that that humility is needed for many of us. And reciprocity, I think, is such an important piece. So a lot of these teachings that I've kind of grown up with, that's in my Indigenous blood, from our grandfather teachings, reciprocity is a big thing. That equal exchange, I think, is a really important energy. All those things are showing up in bigger ways, I think, in these spaces. And we're being called up to be like, is this a reciprocal exchange? Am I helping that equity energy, in our spaces, which I know many of us are trying, but I think we need to keep going. We just need to keep going. And yeah, what I'm seeing out there is that I think that more people are waking up, and I can feel like a rumbling in the earth. It's like a rumbling of the Earth Mother saying things cannot be this way. I've been thinking really recently, this is so honest, about what I would do. Like, I've been thinking about receiving actual money, like abundance. For so long, Indigenous healers, it's not okay to receive money. We receive tobacco for our work. So that has been such a big conversation for me over the years, because people shame me for receiving money for my work. And I've had to work through it so big. But I think, oh my goodness, if we could spread out the money, and women of color and white women, and we're all in business, and we're like, it's an equitable exchange, and there's money flowing for all of us, what we could do, the change we could make. But it's something I'm still working on to this day, that I deserve that too, because there's so much worthiness to work through as an Indigenous woman and as a healer who has been told, like, you're not allowed to receive money for your work and your medicine in the world. That was a big, long response to your question.
That's
but
great. Hey,
it was a lot was rising.
This is your episode, so you can take up as much space as you want. You told me, hey, shut up, I got more to say. I'd be like, okay. So that's wild. I mean, that's huge. You're only allowed to receive tobacco. So what are you supposed to do? Open a smoke shop and then sell tobacco, who is this sacred ally, but sell it in this way that's been so commodified? Like, what? It just doesn't even make sense of this outdated limitation, judgment, paradigm, belief, whatever you want to call it. So that's huge. What do you get this from all sides, from like white and Indigenous and all types of people?
Yeah, I mean, there's the hardest part is receiving lateral violence from my own community. That's what we call it, right? Because it's
Oh,
like that. Um, that happens. That's happened to me many times, and that's really hard for me to experience because it's almost like you don't belong to our tribe anymore. Like, or that you're moving, like we're pushing you out because you're not doing things the way that the protocols that we're keeping, and the way you're supposed to be doing things. So that's where my trusting and listening to spirit and that growth from when I was a child is helpful, because I know what my ancestors asked me to do. I dream of them. They tell me very powerfully, but I have to keep coming back to that trust. When the outside voices tell me you're doing it wrong, you're not enough. And yeah, from the other side too, I think the other side, it's more of like that bias of like, I think innately we'd have that bias of like women of color don't deserve as much. Or if from an Indigenous perspective, well, Indigenous people are poor, they're alcoholics, they're whatever those biases are, right? It's like, um, yeah, or they'll do things for tobacco. All of that sort of stuff is like that's all in there. So yeah, there is, I'd say, from both sides. From the white side, it's sort of just like you're not worthy of this. Like we don't see you as equally worthy. And then from the other side is the lateral violence piece. That can be really challenging.
wow. I imagine it must take a lot of courage to stay true to your own inner guidance in the face of being, othered by your own people. I mean, I imagine that must hurt a lot.
Yeah. I work a lot with my therapist and my healer people a lot on this, because I mean, I guess that comes, what I was saying before is like, we've come here, I think, with original instructions, and Creator has channeled this for us. And it's like, if I didn't listen to that, I remember a reader once, like some reader, a psychic once told me, if you don't listen to your ancestors and what you're being called to do, this will impact your children and the next generations to come. By you not stepping up into your purpose, it is going to impact your children. And I just can't do that. Like I just feel like I want them to rise and thrive as Indigenous beings in their own way, how they want to. So I need to do this too. And that was the push, and it was like a kick in the ass of like, you need to do this. That's what I'll always remind myself of. If I stop, because there's so many days I want to stop and hide in bed and give it all up, like so many days, but I just can't. I know that I can't. And I'm here to spread the medicine that I'm here to spread. And I believe that so many are too.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, please don't give up. That's amazing. Um, I'd love to hear, the piece that I'd love to hear more about your experience with watching your white peers rise, and you're like, is there something wrong with me? Am I doing it wrong? Whatever, and oh, there's like it's racism, colonialism, just the freaking patriarchy, and it's there's so many subtle inherent biases, which we've kind of touched on here already, that make us, look at like, oh, this is a pretty white woman, so I'm going to buy her stuff instead of this pretty Indigenous woman, or not, or this Indigenous woman who doesn't look the way that a European standard of beauty looks. And like, there's so many weird little biases that people hold, and it's like almost overwhelming to look at it and be like, well, how do we, make this equitable? And so I'd love to hear, what are your specific requests? If you could be like, white woman, here's what I ask of you, I'd love to hear that.
Oh goodness, there's so many things. And this is just from experience with things that have been harmful. And like when I speak of harm, people will say like, I'm sorry I offended you. And I'm always like, I'm not offended. I'm genuinely hurt. Like harm means that you hurt me. And it's just a feeling in my energy, like my body takes an actual hit. So I'd say paying, when you're reaching out to a person of color to share their medicine in some way. I don't think the standards of, well, you get exposure. I don't know if that, I mean, it depends. I run that through my own wisdom and my own knowing, but it just doesn't run anymore. You know, if you're asking somebody, like I've had people ask me to do opening ceremonies or ceremonies, and they just say, well, you'll be exposed to my audience. And that's, to me, like, I just think in these days now, there needs to be more. Because to me, that is like, that's medicine that I've worked through all that trauma I talked about, right? To gain this medicine. And I know, and then the next day they're saying, oh, they have a 7-figure business, right? But they can't pay me for my like hour ceremony. So things like that, that I see, that I think this doesn't add up, right? But again, that bias is running through. Well, like, she's an Indigenous woman and she'll do it. She'll do it for tobacco, so she'll do it for free. And like, so that's one thing, is I think paying and being reciprocal is really important. Um, that's the first thing that really comes to my like awareness that I can think of. That's really important. Yeah, not, I think trying to listen, like, this sounds so simple, but sometimes I think I'm a fairly like graceful sharer. Like when I write an email back, or I respond to something. So if you get like something, so say it's a request, I request money of whatever, that defensiveness and coming back, that's really harmful. That can be really harmful, right? So I think just being really aware of like, yeah, just being open-hearted and listening to voices that maybe you haven't listened before. Maybe you just haven't. I think white women have a lot of entitlement. Entitlement is something that I speak about because I've been working on it this year. Entitlement can really trigger me. But I realize it's because it's been white entitlement. We're entitled to your land. We're entitled to your medicines. We're entitled to all these things. We're going to take it from you. And I just think, like, maybe asking yourself, how am I acting entitled? If I'm acting entitled in any way, like it's almost like a birthright. Like you just have that in your bones, and you're like, it's not your fault. You're marinating in white supremacy and white entitlement. You've been birthed into it. So it's not your fault, but how are you acting out of entitlement? Entitled to take time, entitled to take medicine, entitled to take energy, that's something that I notice not a lot, but when I felt harm, it's been because a white woman has felt entitled to me in some way without any reciprocity.
Yeah, that must feel really dehumanizing. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, no, I think that's the core of it. I think, like, I could give examples, but I think that if you can reflect on, where have I received this entitlement? What entitlement do I naturally have being a white woman? And just acknowledging it, just acknowledge it, maybe even claiming it, because maybe parts of us want to push that away, because I know when we work at like the patriarchy thing, we're like, well, we don't have the entitlement men have. So we just think, oh, but then you also have that to work with. So think about a person of color, they have that to work with, and they have this huge other piece of the racism part, right? So I think that's a really good question to ask yourself, because it's like that I guess we talk about privilege, right? It's that privilege that you just have being who you are. And people will be like, well, I didn't choose this. Well, no, but this is what we're living in right now, right? And how do we make that reconciliation, retribution, reciprocal exchange? It's part of how we're going to heal the earth. I believe that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I feel like these are like the building blocks of humility, like the ABCs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's interesting too. And you say, this is part of how we heal the earth. And I think in two things, you say people didn't choose to be born white in it, but they can choose to listen, like you've said, and they can choose to examine, have some freaking self-awareness, right? And like examine, well, what are my expectations, assumptions, and entitlements? That's free. It doesn't cost anything to examine that inside of you, like it's not going to take anything away from you. And of course, reciprocity. And then I think inherent in this, part of what we've been sold in this patriarchal paradigm is such scarcity. And of course there is, scarcity isn't totally made up. There is only so much. There's only so much summer to grow food. And there's only so many, we go on and on. We all see there is real scarcity in the world, but how real is the scarcity that's motivating us. And like, this is something I feel a lot too of like, I feel like we've been taught that there's not enough. But when you look at nature, you look at the world, you look at the elements and the earth, especially just the earth's abundance, I don't see scarcity. And it's so weird to embody this scarcity. And I feel like this scarcity is like at the core of so much of this entitlement, because take, or else you'll be taken from. And like, not paying, not being in reciprocity because, oh my God, I need to hoard everything I have because I can't afford to, because what scarcity. And it's like, I feel like it still lives in my bones. This is not something I fully integrated, and it's intense. But when we look at the earth has been for me a great teacher of, okay, maybe it's not as scarce as you think. What else is possible? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and even any, I just love to hear your thoughts.
Well, when you talked about that, I always get images, right? Like visions. I just saw our people as abundant people. And I just saw that, like, I think we did thrive with those values of that we have enough and we're blessed, right? So that it's sort of like we are enough, we're blessed, we have. At the time, we would exchange all of these beautiful things. We had that gratitude practice that was, I think, so huge. And even I think with this money piece, I sort of see like this Indigenous healers aren't supposed to be paid. I almost sometimes wonder if that was like the colonial church coming in and saying like, money is evil, whatever those Christian values were, right? So then that somehow got twisted into our belief about, because I do believe we were abundant people. We had fur. Especially in this region, we traded furs. We had beautiful, beautiful things. And I think we felt like it was enough. So I would love to somehow, I think that's why I'm doing the healing work that I'm doing, to somehow call back that, like we talk about old traditions, and those are beautiful, but I think I'd love to call back the, Indigenous people were abundant, and we deserve that again, to be well provided for within all ways. I would really love that to be like a thing, like just something that I'm planting as seeds, and you're right. Nature is abundant, and we go through those cycles, and nature trusts, nature surrenders, like all of those things that I think as human beings, we're trying to control and hold on so tight to. The earth shows us that beauty of all of those teachings. So yeah, if we can lean into that a little bit more, it's so hard as human beings, but I think if we could lean into that a little bit more, we would open ourselves up to that enoughness, that there is this abundance flowing our way always. And I'm not speaking that from like a bypass, spiritual, like, oh, the abundance is always around. Like, you're right. It's here. It's here embodied. Like when we look at like the buds blooming right now, it's here. But how do we disperse that in equitable ways too? Which, I'm here for that. Like, I'm just like, bring it on so that I can like, I can like be the source, the channel for the money to like move out to the communities that need it. Like, I've recently just really rooted that in, because that's what I'm here for too. Not hoarding, just like being that like reciprocal vehicle or vessel for that abundance to flow into and then flow out of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In that, you said you're here for it, to be that vessel. And oh, wait a second. That idea that perhaps it was the colonialism, that was beliefs that came in, and that, maybe that was bought and sold, of like, money is bad, you should only accept tobacco. That is I love this theory. I love this theory. And because it makes sense you're like, people were provided for, there was abundance. And it's such a different paradigm of like, you need money to exchange things versus just this like trade. And there are certain currencies, but it's just a different paradigm, like money versus the Indigenous way. And to have that come in, there's so many layers. I don't know, that one really hit something for me. But coming fast forward, so you're saying, you're being that vessel for that to come through. Is there a specific like healing or awakening in you, like we talked about earlier, of the spaces held and you had to access that agency or awareness on your own. That has really happened for you in that,
Yeah, I mean, it's so kind of recent, to be honest. And I think it's I've always been working on that sort of worthiness piece. But I think that entitlement, shifting the word entitlement this year has been really big for me, because I'm just like, how can I hold entitlement? I'm entitled to this too, but it's just taken so long for me to really feel that. But the big thing is like, this year has shown me, because my children have been home on and off, and I've been trying to run my business and the capacity is low. I'm trying to write a book that I have a deadline for. Like, so I just have been really like asking myself, like, what, like, if I'm going to be that channel and that vessel, how can I best do this in a way that's sustainable for me, this Indigenous body? Because I think for so long too, I've sacrificed parts of myself for others as a healer too. That's just a natural thing. But how can I not sacrifice myself and give pieces away of myself anymore, and hold this embodiment and all the pieces in, like, root it down and hold that for myself? How can I create sustainability for me and my family? Putting that first, I think, and foremost. I think it's sort of just about like coming back to like that worthiness. Like, I'm worthy of creating sustainable energy for me. And for me, because I have a chronic illness, I've realized that I've lived the past almost 2 decades running my business as though I don't have one. I've been almost ignoring it, because it's just like, got to fit in, even that assimilation piece, like, just got to hustle, got to do this. I mean, some of my parts, I have to hustle, right? I had children. I have to put food on the table. But now I'm at a point where I'm just like, I'm not going to abandon my body or give parts of myself away any longer for this, because my health matters too much. And I want to be an elder. I want to be here for a long time. So it's been very recent that I'm like, okay, I have lupus. This body has lupus. I am just like, I'm going to try to create things now from that place, And part of that is from like those early spiritual teachings that are like, you're thinking your lupus into being. And by saying I have lupus, you're, imprinted, like all of those things I've had to like unwind myself from, which is almost self-blame and shame of like, right, you created this in some way. And I'm like, I was 17. Like, I wasn't thinking about creating this in any way. So I've had to like unweave myself from all of that dynamic and just be like, no, this is like acknowledging the body that I came here with.
Thank you. I love this. That's huge. And just, I think this is interesting too. I know you've talked about it like on your gram and stuff, and you're not like hiding that you have lupus to the world, but there is such that expectation to hustle. And like, the white men who are single or who their partners are caretaking the children who are not chronically ill really can put 80, 100 hours a week or more into something. And that it's frustrating. I mean, I'm someone who also has like chronic conditions, and it's so frustrating because you're like, I just can't, like, I've been burned out. It's hard. It sucks. Like, it's not worth living when you try to do that, the hustle, it just can't. And so, I hear what you're saying, and what you're saying, this is beautiful. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm just like, so many things I want to talk about. Two things. One, I want to hit on that piece around this very common new age concept of you created this for yourself. And I think this is sticky because I feel like we are such powerful creators of our reality. But did I create this chronic condition for myself? Maybe, but maybe it was super subconscious because of the environment I was brought up in and my epigenetic conditions. Same for you for lupus. You didn't say like, I'm going to have lupus. You're like 16. You're like, when I'm 17, I'm just going to get this great condition for the rest of my life. And it's going to be amazing, but there's these epigenetic conditions, the way we're brought up, the environment we live in, the toxins that we're exposed to that are unprecedented for anyone in history. Like, there's all these things. It's not just us. And I think that is and then I hear so many people not wanting to acknowledge what hurts or what's not working in their life, what they're struggling with, what they're challenged about, because they don't want to amplify it. And I'm like, wait a second, could we just like talk about this for a second? I would love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, so in my early 20s, I was like sort of hopped on the train of all of those new age mentalities, and they were helpful for that part where I was in. Of course, there's always both, right? Some of it's helpful, some of it's but I finally came to this place where I was just like, oh my goodness, I've been shaming myself for so many years for living in this body and all of the pain that I have on a daily basis. And then in the shaming, I've been ignoring it. I've been like not acknowledging it or giving it any space. The fatigue, like sometimes I'm like, I'm trying to, again, I told you, like run this business without having a chronic illness, run this business, not acknowledging some of like maybe the biases that have impacted my business as an Indigenous woman. Just that not acknowledging, I think is so prevalent for so many of us. You're right. We just want to like bypass it and just become, I'm not going to see it. I'm not going to bring it up. So now I'm all about the like, give it space. And like, as I do that, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have compassion for that fatigue that I've been pushing past for like so many years. It's so interesting. In the last 5 years, I've had these downloads of this like chronic illness course that I want to create, but it's taken me 5 years. And I'm like, next year's the year. Like it's coming out, but it's good because I feel like we've done the like nutritional, the like drink the green juices. And I do those things, like do the smoothies, do the gluten-free. And then it's just like this whole spirit part and the whole shame part where we're not being acknowledged for all of it. So I think that piece has been missing. Maybe, I mean, I'm sure folks are doing it, but I just think for myself, it's been missing. And then in some of my communities, I can see how that shame piece is still there.
Right. And it has a really tangible impact on our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm. It really does. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing all that too. It's I think you're not alone in this. I know so many people listening are probably like, oh, I feel this. Like this is it. There's so many people, whether they have kids or a chronic condition or they just have deep shame about stuff. Like people are carrying so much and they think that it's their fault, their problem. And like, no, it's the fucking system's problem, but we have to figure out what we're going to do about it. And so, so much. I mean, I could go on and on for hours about this, so I'll just anything else you want to say about that before we kind of transition?
No, I think we delved pretty deep.
All right, cool. So something I really was coming up, I've seen this in your Insta and it's just something that before I talk to guests, sometimes just little themes pop up and I'm like, okay, I'll ask about that. And so rainbows are like, what's up? We want to hear about rainbows, rainbow medicine, like, tell us what this means to you and how you carry everything, all the rainbows.
Yeah, all the rainbows. So my grandfather gifted me my spirit name, and it's Nagwe, which means healing rainbow woman. And at the time, gosh, it was probably like 13 or 14 years ago now. At the time, I mean, it was such a beautiful ceremony, and he called it down in his language, which he rarely spoke. And there was this hawk like sitting out, like it was just like this perfect, sunny, beautiful day. And at the time I was like, what does that mean? Like, I was like, I mean, at the time I was doing healing work, but I didn't quite know. I didn't really feel like, I could claim it fully. Then I started doing healing work and calling them rainbow healing sessions because I would see rainbow energy coming out of my hands and my heart as I was like laying my hands over folks who were experiencing this healing. So that felt like, okay, it's the rainbow's coming out of my cellular, makeup or my energy field, or it's being channeled through. So that was really cool. But in the last year or so, what I've really realized is that it's like this bridging. I realized that part of my soul mission, my spirit path is to be a bridge. So it's like this rainbow bridge of like, because a rainbow kind of is like shaped like a bridge, right? And it's sort of like for all people, because the majority of people in my communities are white women. I would say, there's other folks that are not Indigenous, but I'd say like for a long time, I think I was speaking to white women, trying to sort of like inviting them in to do this journey with me, to decolonize. And I think that I'm a bridge for that. So a bridge for sort of calling people in and then just having them experience that and listen. Then they'll listen with compassion and then they start to take action. So it's like bringing them from that like non-knowing place to just over that bridge to be like, okay, now I'm going to step up and rise and be there for folks of color and learn and do all the things. And also just bridging that old way to the new way, right? Which is kind of painful and hard sometimes, and it feels a bit trailblazy. But it's like bridging those old ways, because I believe I always have these visions of the old ways. To me, aren't protocols and steps. They are like the dreamers and the visionaries that lived in the tribes that said, we see this coming our way. They were the healers that were trusting their inherent gifts, right? So it's like, for me, it's bridging those ways and bringing those into this like modern time and helping others find that too. So that's what the rainbow medicine means to me right now. It might mean something to me, different to me next year, but that's what I'm working with right now, being that bridge.
Cool. I can't help but think of, I think it's Bifrost, Bifrost, the rainbow bridge in the Nordic traditions. And it's so, I love it. Like, I'm not saying it's just, that's just what comes to mind. You don't have to be doing Bifrost, but, and for anyone who's not familiar with that, that's in the, the Nordic mythology, by the rainbow bridge. I think it goes to Valhalla, to like the other world. It's like the bridge to the other world. And so I love that just like rainbow medicine shows up in different ways and different people, but that's cool. Like this bridge, I love this rainbow bridge over how you're calling people in this way and how that's showing up. And I wonder, is there anything specific about the spectrum itself that relates to this?
It's so interesting. It's just yesterday I had this healing session, and I was seeing myself as this sort of like crystalline like prism with like these rainbow colors in my energy field. And I've just recently really been working on claiming that. Like, I think for so long with those racist words, there's been like, you're a dirty Indian, you're not enough. Like, there's just been, I've shared that experience at the hospital where they're like, yeah, how much alcohol have you drank? Like, there's just all this, like, there's all this messaging in my system that's been like, you're not that. So there's something about that prism and the spectrum and the energy of sort of the diversity, I guess, of all of those colors that I'm starting to kind of embody and see, okay, I'm really going to step up here. And no matter what people are saying, no matter what people are throwing my way, because people throw stuff sometimes, I think that prism and that like multi-layered energy kind of protects me too. I'm working with it as protection in that way. So that's what's coming through as you ask that question.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so much messaging. Wow. That's a lot to carry, but I'm glad that it's coming up, transmuting, coming out. That's like, I wish I just had a magic wand. It would be like, whoop. It's like done, like, wait, where'd the messaging go? It'd be awesome. I guess we are the magic wands in our own lives. Cool. Well, this has been really beautiful. Thanks for coming and sharing. And I know you got a book coming out in about a year, and I've heard a rumor of an oracle deck and stuff. So what's the best way for, what else do you offer? What's the best way to people to find you and stay in touch and hear about these things?
Yeah, so I'd love to have you. I have an animal spirit quiz on my site that you are welcome to do. That's a way in that we can connect, and Instagram is always a great way to see you on there. Right now I have a membership. I offer a membership, and I also have a mentorship program that just like really supports healers and creatives and visionaries and trailblazers and rising into their own medicine. The membership holds that kind of space too. So those are the sort of the two ways that you can work with me at this point. But I would love, as my book comes out, I would love for you to get a copy of that, because that really helps me amplify my message in the world too.
And where can people find you on Instagram? And
Instagram, it's asha.frost. And then my website is ashafrost.com.
Radical. And those are, of course, in the show notes, everybody, as always. Any final words before we say goodbye today?
No, I think that I thank you for sort of just like this has been quite a diverse conversation. There's just so many like elements and essence of what I got to choose and speak of. So I'm just grateful, just helping, maybe just like reminding people that you do have that wisdom within you. And sometimes it just takes a breath or a walk outside, but just to really trust yourself because there's a lot of medicine within your soul.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thanks for taking your time to come on the show and share your magic and medicine with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the roads are winding.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.